Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EVN Destroyer podcast. My name is Nejdat Zadruyan. I'm the editor of the Creative Tech section here at EVN Report. Our guest this week is Posse, the Vice President of Data and AI at ServiceTitan. He joins us to discuss his long career in the world of data science and how data practices inform decisions and influence product development at the world's largest companies. We also spoke about how startups should best utilize the generative AI technologies that have been released over the last few years and how ServiceTitan has been building them into their products. Thank you for listening. Christian, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's start with a little bit of your background. I know you have quite a storied career. You worked at some really interesting places. Tell us how you got started in the world of data science.
Very young, actually. I got interested in actually data early on. As I explain often, is I'm a kind of a control freak. I hate being manipulated. And early on, I realized that essentially, with the same data, people could say white or black. And so for me, there was an element of, if I don't want to be manipulated, I need to understand data. So that was the first motivation. The second motivation later came realizing that, we live in a world right now which is driven by data. Every single field has data.
When did you come to that realization?
I would say when I started to work, coming out of the university and the project, and when I started to work in my first startups, I could apply my techniques to any field. And that was a way for me to fund what I wanted to do, which is essentially be the platform out of my PhD work. I could not fund the platform itself. The way I funded the development of the platform was funding through solving applications that just by accident needed the platform development. Mm-hmm. So this is what I call it, something that we apply actually in modern ways in companies, even like ServiceTitan, where I'm developing, an ML platform, an AI platform, a data platform. You don't sell the platform, you sell the development of the platform on how they affect essentially your customers. So the applications that you built on top of it. But so early on, what I realized is I could apply, my techniques in all kinds of fields that I didn't know about. And I applied that in field that I never knew I would learn around early psychology, how infant, less than 9 months develop. There are studies which are being done, but then you have to analyze its data. So for me, it was developing the data technique, but in the same time learning about the field of psychology of babies. I had no idea. I worked, in omics science, all the system biologies and very complex system. I work in climatology, in homeland security, in social networks before they were, a fab and something, fun to do. And so what I realized is pretty much every field, if you really want to understand and start optimizing, start with data. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was that still thread in my career. When you look at my LinkedIn profile, you will say, you've been all over the place. But there's a still thread. And the still thread is every time I jump into a field that I have no idea what the field is about, I bring my data expertise. So I will learn about the data, of course, and I can know how to use the data. But at the same time, I'm going to learn a completely new field. So I'm an eternal student. And so really that's the thing for me, which is fascinating. And I think that, the future is even more data-driven. Maybe too much.
So the ability to comprehend data kind of gives you the ability to enter any field with the capability to understand it, I guess.
Yes, and another aspect that I think that a lot of the AI that you're seeing nowadays tend to kind of diminish is understanding data is one thing. One of the aspects of deep learning and AI, there is a kind of what I've observed is a less appreciation for what data truly are, and more, it's just a bunch of things that you feed into a system that creates some magic and there will be an output and it's marvelous. It's not the case, Understanding the data, getting acquainted with the data is your frenemy. There are good things in data, there can be bad things in data. Are they really representative? What are the biases? What are the errors in measurements? What are the bad stuff? Or what are the things that you should be concerned about? Mm-hmm. Like does the data encode a prejudice, mm-hmm. or things which are, very human. Okay. And I'm not saying that in a positive way. So that you need to understand your data. It's super important. But my fear a little bit is in this world of democratized AI, we just kind of discount now the data preparation, the data acquisitions, the loving the data. We just take that. It's so easy. You feed into a generative AI, OpenAI API, and you think magic is being created. But that's actually what concerns me the most. with the current development of AI. It's not the technology, it's the way we use them.
So that's a really interesting point. So the way most people are integrating AI applications or AI technology into their applications is just by going straight to an API, as you said, that's offered by OpenAI and its competitors. That kind of skips the preparing the model part, feeding it the data, training it. What do you think needs to be done in order to mitigate that in the age where most people who integrate AI won't be building their own models because it's just far too expensive and not really possible for most companies? Do you think there needs to be sort of an architecture layer that that helps companies to mitigate some of those concerns that you're talking about, like other tooling that sits on top of OpenAI?
Yes, because if I use extreme expressions and that you've heard, which is nowadays I think that a lot of us are essentially like the sorcerer apprentice. We are essentially building castle on top of quicksands because we don't really know that technology which is under us. In the early days, the models were simple. So you could really understand their strength and their limitation, their bias. You talk, in the old days of ML, you talk about variance and bias, something very simple that you can explain, that you can control. But nowadays we have this black box that, which is fascinating, nobody really understands. Those large language models, we don't really know when they start having these emerging patterns that has to work. Nobody knows. When you create these prompts, you never know how efficient your prompt or how resilient your prompt is. So there's this whole culture of building prompt and being comfortable with that. It's something which is very difficult. So there's a whole aspect of I would say validation that needs to be put in place much better than what you're seeing today. An element of ethical AI as well. You need to remove all of the biases. Remember, the LLMs are learning the knowledge of the world. Mm-hmm. That means human knowledge. And if we all know about humans, we are everything except objective. So those models encompass the good and the worst of humanity. And they just give that back with efficiency.
Right.
And so in that regard is whatever you built, because now we have even less control on those models, but also less control on the data that we're giving, because now it's so easy. You can download the web and send the web. We don't even know what we're sending sometimes. Mm-hmm. Just send it. That we need to have much more, and I think a higher hand on those providers of the system in terms of validation.
So are you optimistic that techniques like grounding or augmenting models so that they can retrieve data from specific sources, the administrator of that API is providing it, are good enough to mitigate some of these concerns? Or
it's a different problem. So grounding essentially is saying, okay, you have this knowledge of the world encoding in the LLMs, but essentially the problem is like everything. It's great at doing what's popular, but as soon as you want to go in what I call the long tail, so your specific problem, and we'll talk about ServiceTitan. If you think about ServiceTitan, we are specific to the trades. It's a very specific niche CRM market. Suddenly that knowledge that you're seeing, you read in the newspaper, suddenly it kind of erode. It's not as great, and you can realize that the LLMs kind of struggle with really being efficient and answering these questions. So the problem is more about that you need to augment these models with that specific knowledge. And so with grounding, you bring your own specific knowledge and you're trying to coerce the larger models with essentially that additional knowledge coming from your own field. Mm-hmm. But does that answer, let's say, does that address the other problem about what we call hallucination? Does that address the problem about being more factual? Not really. It biases, it kind of shrink that knowledge more towards your own domain.
Right.
So it brings some grounding in that regard, because it's not going to barf some kind of a random 42 meaning of life into a question that you ask. But still you have a chance that actually the facts that he's representing are totally wrong.
And the data that you're grounding it with could also have your biases in it, right?
Oh, totally, yes. And then exactly. So that it's let's say it's a good step in a way of biasing towards that, but that does not solve everything.
Right. I think there's some really interesting and exciting opportunities around building the tooling and that architecture that sits around the LLM for that. Before we get to ServiceTitan, you've worked at some of the top tech companies in the world. I'm curious, and over the last couple of decades, I guess you could say, I'm curious when the realization of the value of data became so apparent to these companies. Was it always there from the beginning, or was there a bit of an aha moment 15 years ago or 20 years ago?
So all companies are different because it depends on the purpose that they have. If you think about it, is many companies, they start by building essentially the table stake. So they put in place the processes, they maybe do some automation. And so maybe the data acquisition is not necessarily the first thought. It's building a software that will help, customers. And when you're in the CRM space, you have multiple customers. And so what you're trying to do is, streamline the process, automate the process, digitize the process, and you're thinking that way. But in order to do so, you also get your customer data. And so there's this realization at some point that if you stay at what I call the plumbing layer, on the process layer, you're going to be outpaced. You need to look into what is the added value on top of that. And suddenly you realize that this data that you're collecting from your customers, that's the real gold. Nobody else has that data. Mm-hmm. Everybody can use the open API. Everybody can use that. Nobody can use the API and ground it into your own data. So suddenly you realize that every company that have this ability to acquire data and at scale, for example, a ServiceTitan or Salesforce before, or LinkedIn, name those companies, or Google, of course. Then suddenly your data is a vault that you can really build sustainable differentiation in your product. Mm-hmm. You can create a real differentiation. You can create something that even the competition cannot. If you just build a model at OpenAI, I'm sure there will be competitors, and you see already other competitors, and there are already other solutions which says, we are killing the transformers, like the RedNet and others. So if you stay at that level, you don't have essentially what I call a sustainable differentiation. Your data, it's your vault. Nobody can have them. So you can develop insights, recommendations, knowledge that just others can't. Mm-hmm. It's nowhere encoded.
But when did the companies realize that?
Oh my goodness! I don't think there's I don't think there's a system. It's definitively, and I work at several of those companies. Actually one that I worked for a short time. Unfortunately, there was a great company, but there was a restructurations. But they were essentially another plumbing company. Essentially, they were dealing with all of the financial transactions, the wired transactions. And the number of transactions that happens every single day between those banks is larger than the web by order of magnitudes. And what they were doing for years was just being that plumbing layers. And, somebody at some point, again, it's a bit by accident, realized that we have a lot of data there. Mm-hmm. So we can start building things like, for example, credit check early on, because our data tells us that we can really identify somebody which is going to defraud when they do a credit card application. We can do all kinds of things like that. And so I don't think there is a moment maybe some companies have that goal, like the Teslas of the world. We start by building a car which is very expensive, mm-hmm. They can fund the cheaper car that will fund the cheapest car. And so some companies have, but very often it's more the opposite. You try to solve a problem, mm-hmm. which is at that plumbing process layer I described. In the process, you're being successful, you're acquiring data, and then you realize that you have that. And that is, I would say, I don't know how it happens. And actually, it's very interesting because for ServiceTitan, actually, I have a close connection with our CTO. And when he joined ServiceTitan, which is before me, he was talking about all of this software that, this operating system for the trades that ServiceTitan is building. And it was fascinating. But he said, but we're not really doing data. But 6 months later, he calls me and said, it's all about data. Mm-hmm. So there's a moment where that realization happens, but I haven't found that as a systematic, step.
I love to see in like the history of the Googles of the world when that light bulb went off, because I think maybe it's possible to imagine that on day one it wasn't there, but certainly by like the early 2000s when the advertising products and stuff were built into Google, they must have really seen the the value that data captures, right?
So let's talk about Google. So if you remember before Facebook, the motto of Google was, you come on Google, you search, and you're out. It's a matter of in and out in a matter of seconds. You come here, you search, we give you the right, we want you out of Google. Mm-hmm. And that was the model for years. Then you get Facebook. And Facebook, you go on Facebook, you spend, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you have session stickiness. Oh boy, how much do you know about your customers when you spend? It became a revolution at Google that was, we need to change entirely our model. Instead of this in and out, we need to develop sticky session. When you come on Google, we want you to stay on Google. And you have seen some of this change. Remember, we went from this 10 blue link to immersive type of experience where you get, a kind of a interactive type of results, and actually you click there and you stay. You never leave Google. Mm-hmm. And the idea was to create stickiness. Why? Because you know much better your customer this way, because you can track, of course, everything you know. In all of these companies, you sneeze, it's logged, they know it.
Right.
And so that aspect is suddenly the motto changed entirely. So even a company like, I would say, Google, which is really a top front of the data, actually did not realize early on this notion of stickiness. Facebook brought that.
Until the competition nudged them to think about it. Yeah. There's so many interesting topics we can go into there, but maybe we'll come back to it. Let's speak a little bit about ServiceTitan. So you're the first guest from ServiceTitan on the podcast.
Oh.
And ServiceTitan, I think, to most Armenian tech audiences, is most people are very, very familiar with it. But just quickly, before we dive into your role and some of the products you guys are building, tell us what ServiceTitan is.
So ServiceTitan essentially is trying to build the operating system for the trades. Explaining the trades, essentially, those are these constructors which are really good at their craft. They're plumbers, electricians, they are AC installers, and they really do a great job at that. The problem is to make the business live and thrive, it's way more complicated. So how essentially you do your lead generation, so your marketing, your acquisitions, how you manage your presence online. How do you make sure that when somebody calls, you can book the person, and you can book the person with an efficient technician? How do you optimize your technicians? How do you do the whole payroll and pay and inventory and supply chain? And I can go on and on. And I've been there for a year and a half. I still don't get the complexity, and it's really mind blowing to realize how complex it is to just manage, a shop, even a residential shop, in the trades. And the trades have been historically without any software. It was not interesting for most companies to develop a software. So what's fascinating about ServiceTitan, so the two founders are sons, of immigrants from Armenia that actually were in the trades. And what they decided to do is essentially they did their schools, they went to the best schools in the US and were ready to go for the big companies. And one summer they decided to, why don't we have help our parents? Because what they observed is you spend a small amount of time in the trades, which is really where you excel, and you spend so much time just driving the business, and people struggle. Many of these, mom and dad shop, they don't have a life.
Right.
Because it's all spent there, or they cannot expand because they don't know how. It's all on paper and little know-how, very smart know-how, but it's not efficiently encoded. So they decided to build a software on a summertime to help their parents. Mm-hmm. And 10 years later, you have this unique solution. Yeah. And the idea is really to build to help the contractor thrive. But what I love about that, and you will see, which is phenomenal, it's not just about making more money. People have different goals. And I was telling you, some of the contractors, the only thing they want is essentially give my life back. Mm-hmm. I want life with my family.
Right.
I don't want to make more money. I'm happy, but I want to see him grow my little kids. And by the way, that touches me because there's a point in my life where I was traveling so much that I missed a year of my 3-year-old. So not seeing my family was really bad for me. And I appreciate that when you do that every day, because it's the only way to survive your business. So we're not encouraging just make more money. Is if we can streamline all of the processes for you to give back, right, time. But if you want to make more money, we can also help you.
It's up to you.
And everything we do is really measure in those metrics. Mm-hmm. One of our motto is changing life. And you think it's pompous, it's not. the testimony that we have and we hear over and over, we are changing lives. So ServiceTitan is really building this operating system to help the trades thrive in different ways that they want. So it's definitively what I call a very high purpose mission. You know, when you hear the story, and I think the people coming to ServiceTitan is because they realize that it's not just a software company. You are impacting in lives, people's.
And as you mentioned earlier, ServiceTitan was founded by Armenian immigrants in California, and I believe now it's almost 5 years that the office that you guys have an office in Armenia as well, and a lot of the engineering and R&D work is done here in the country, including the data science team, which you lead. So you're the VP of AI and data science at ServiceTitan.
Yes.
Tell us about some of the AI products that you guys are building into the platform now.
So we have to just about how we think about AI. You know, we're not thinking about AI in the sense, oh, it has to be AI. We're trying to solve problems. And it happens that sometimes you need some AI. So it's more identifying, hey, what are you trying to do? And for example, there's, we have some piece of our software which are phenomenal, but the onboarding process is very complicated because our customer has to input a lot of customized data into the system so that we can understand and start working. So for example, one way you would think about the problem is, what if we could automate that onboarding process so that they don't have to go there and start, importing all of the data and start defining all of these services that they want to have in their processes? Let's automate. So sometimes automation does not require AI. But in that case, for example, yes, we will automate the entire onboarding of a customer. And by the way, we'll do recommendations off the shelf right away. Those are, for example, you should define those type of services because those are the ones that we're seeing the most being used by all of the trades, so that you come there and you're already ready for business the next day. So that it's more about thinking about it. I will give you another example where you need AI, but you don't think AI. So another thing which is phenomenal about ServiceTitan, it says, born in the trades, and really it's built for the trades and born in the trades. Several of our, employees are actually contractors. They have a business on the side and they use ServiceTitan. So believe me, dog food, we said that we eat our own dog food. We hear a lot about the feedback directly from our own employees. They have a business. So they know the trades really well. They know all of the dynamics within the business. And so there is one, for example, which is a business, a job always start with a phone call. I have a plumbing problem, so I'm calling you. And there will be a conversation between the customer service representative and the person. Hopefully, if there is here a job, it should be converted into, a booking. Not necessarily. The problem is that on the other hand of the phone, the CSR, the customer support representative, is rated. He has a performance to be paid, and his performance is based on his booking rate. How many calls is able to transfer into, because it's revenue booking. So there's a tendency of, at the end of the call, they have to rate. Oh, was that a lead? A lead means something that can be transferred into a job. Was it a lead or not? And so sometimes they would tell you that was not a lead because it did not end up, being a booked job. So what we do, we said, we know that there's gaming there, that actually to keep their rate high, they may be misclassifying from time to time a call. It's missed opportunity, it's missed revenue for the contractor. So we said, what if we could do the following? At the end of the call, what if we could analyze in real time the call?
The transcript of the call?
Transcript of the call, and determine that actually there was a real job there and you should call back right away.
Oh, wow.
It's called second chance lead. We do that. So now you think about it. How do you do that? Well, you have a transcript. You need to have AI. You need to build a classifier or an intent classifier, determine that this is the case. But go further. You will see how we think about AI. So now I'm able to identify the second chance lead. So what do I do? Well, I can go into some kind of a tab and show you all of these second chance things which are piling and piling and piling. And you call the manager says, oh, wow, I have all of these second chance lead. So now I need to listen to the call before I call back to know what happened.
The context. Yeah.
How long is the conversation? 6, 8 minutes? Do you think they are going to do that with a ton of a second chance lead? What if you said, I can build a summary?
Right.
Very short, one sentence that tells you everything you need to know so that you can make the call. So you said, I'm going to reduce my 6 to 8 minutes to 15 seconds and make the call. You You need AI. It's called a summarization. And, in a days, it would be complicated. Now you have Gen AI. You take the transcript, you put that into Gen AI, you give a couple of reasons to make the summary very efficient because you want to control the summarization. Okay, I'm pushing 5-minute job, right?
Right.
But we reduce this 8 minutes to 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's what we have released this year. And I can go on and on. By the way, I go further because now I can tell you about what if I can tell you which of these calls you should really pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it will use a different type of AI. So the question is, you think about this process, about how you help. If you need AI, we'll use AI. If it doesn't need AI, we don't use AI. Does it make sense? That's really how we think about it. And so everywhere in the product, from automation to assistance, to insights, we embed AI. So what I love about my role is really I interact with every single team at ServiceTitan, everywhere. Because, everywhere there's a problem eventually that you can solve with AI.
Can you give me a problem of a feature or a product that you guys were looking at building using AI that at the end of the day you decided it's not actually adding some tangible value?
Too early for that. Because no, I'm not joking. Seriously, I haven't won right now because again, the thing is really the way we think about it is, small organizations. So we are very crisp about where we put. So we invest. We really invest. We investigate, and we determine what is the ROI. So we're not just trying because it's cool, and it doesn't pan. We really go from there is a problem there. What's the opportunity? What's the ROI? And then we go after and do this implementation. So not saying that it won't happen, but really there's no randomness in what we're doing. So it really, because, and again, I can tell you that we just went through our planning for next year. We have 100 of ideas that are like that, all of them with a real ROI, and we're going to pick the top ones, and we know already what impact they have.
How do you filter that? How do you assign an impact score to a feature?
So you try to estimate, in different, what you're trying to do. If it's an increase in revenue, it's like, for example, what I was telling you about that feature that we released recently about this second chance lead. So there was an expectation to say, based on what we are saying, maybe, and I'm doing a random number there, just I don't want to give you a number. Let's say there's a missed opportunity of 10% of your calls. So if 10%, we can recover, that's 10% on top of your revenue, directly marked. And that was conservative.
I guess that's an interesting framework as well for thinking about new products that can be built and startups that can be launched around this technology, right? If you have a good idea of who your user persona is, who you're building for, and you're obsessed about solving some tangible problem for them, all that matters is whether or not you solve that problem, right? Because a lot of times these conversations stray into, and I've found myself sort of captured by this as well, swayed into areas of whether or not this is defensible, whether or not somebody can copy the same thing tomorrow. But at the end of the day, if it's something that just adds genuine value into that person's workflow or life, then that's all that's needed.
So yeah, for example, there's a couple of things. It's all about added value to the customer. So it's not about
IP.
It's in sense that we can protect, but at the end of the day is you create a product which has actually often a great retention because those features are so unique. The other things are also about, remember what I was telling you, the fact of trying to reproduce what you're doing. It's hard while because like all of these companies, we have the data that nobody else has. In the early days, academia was doing the research and industry was always behind. And you always said, 20 years earlier, you would say, the forefront of the research really is in universities, and maybe 5 years from now there will be some implementations in industry. That changed entirely with the internet, to the point that actually universities for many years struggled to stay on top of the research because they just did not have the data. But then after, the problem is all of these techniques developed by those companies, and them, the FANG and the others, were hardly reproducible when you publish paper because you didn't have the data. And so there's been some kind of a truce made right now because you could not go on. But again, it's a totally unbalanced world. Once you have the data, it's very hard to reproduce.
Right. I'm curious, for the feature that you mentioned earlier about analyzing the transcripts of calls and identifying whether or not it's a real lead that might convert into a sale, were you guys also relying on data that you had about what conversations turned into leads?
Yes.
To? Okay, so your own historical data.
And plus also, one thing that people don't like to talk about, but subject matter experts. I do believe also in subject matter. So we have, and since we have plenty of subject matter experts, so we also not only take our data and, you have all of telemetry in place, so you know if a call ended up being booked or not. So you have the usual type of data, the funnel data, but also you talk to subject matter experts. And so we also use subject matter experts to reaffirm or confirm or sometimes capture that the data is not telling you.
Tell us about Titan Intelligence. What is Titan Intelligence?
So Titan Intelligence, essentially, it's our initiatives for bringing AI. So I was telling you earlier, ServiceTitan was more building the operating system of the trades, and similarly to Microsoft, so think about Windows, and with the turn of the generative AI, Windows is all about now their assistant, right? They talk about the assistant. Well, Titan Intelligence is essentially, it's kind of the initiatives for bringing AI to the trades. It's not a specific product. Essentially, the way it's being materialized, it's my organization. So we have a very unique structure. You're familiar, with most of tech companies that tend to have a product and a engineering pillar. At ServiceTitan, we have 3 pillars. We have a product, engineering, and data organization. And so it's really that to cement this aspect that we want now to leverage the data that we have, as an initiatives, and we will partner with engineering and product to embed AI into the trades. And so the idea is also that we want to bring AI to the trades without the trades having to go to school and get a PhD in data science.
Right.
How it's going to be translated, we talked a bit earlier, but another aspect is the features become intuitive, they become powerful. And so that aspect, that's why this third pillar was created. It's a full house. So there is product managers, and there are data product managers, data science, ML engineers, data engineers. So let's talk for 1 second about the data PM. The data PM is slightly different from a traditional PM. It's a breed between a product manager and a data scientist. Is somebody that understands very well what data can do or cannot do, and also interface with the traditional product managers to help about what's going to be the user experience of the AI in the product. And so they work in tandem in sense of reinforcing each other. The product manager wants to develop essentially these solutions. The data PM will help on how data can help and be embedded into the product.
Okay. Does that also include providing actionable data insights to your end users?
So we do, yes, essentially think about AI, it's a big term. Essentially for us, it's bringing all kinds of things. So from automation to recommendations or to do insights, absolutely. Insights that help them essentially kind of, at the end of the day, take action on that to get better.
As someone with a lot of product experience, how do you build that for someone as, like you said, isn't going to go get a data science PhD? How do you make those analytics, those metrics that you're presenting that can often look very technical, be really easily comprehensible by someone who doesn't have a data background, like people who are running their businesses?
So we never talk math. We never talk AI. You talk business. So when you talk about building insights, you will talk about what are the metrics that particular industry cater. So, if you are in a trade, things like average ticket,
right?
So the metrics and the report you're going to produce are really talking directly to them in their own language. So we're not going to produce some kind of mathematical formula for which you need to have, a big introductions on how to use it. No, we are chameleons. And by the way, one of the things I was saying earlier, yes, I've been in all the different type of industries. Every time for me, the question is, what language do I need to learn? The language of the trade, the language of
biology.
The biology, it's really translating into that. And so, by the way, which is an interesting problem, when I develop, we start from scratch a new AI solution. So the typical type of modeling, as you know, will focus on what we call precision and recall and this type of metrics. That's great for building your initial model offline. But rapidly, as you go online, your metrics is all based on what were you trying to do and how you translate that into an engagement. And so building that, your metrics become rapidly, the customer is engaging, the customer is doing these actions, these are the right actions, or the customer is not engaging at all. What have we done wrong? Or we did these things to simplify the process, but actually they are still doing all of these things that they were not supposed to, that we are supposed to solve. So you look at the complexity measure. So they never, and the report that I said we will talk about, hey, if you do that, you're going to increase your probability of landing a job. If you do that, you're going to get much better leads. If you do that, you're going to improve your average ticket.
Right.
So you always talk that language, never the math language.
Right. You translate data science into
Exactly.
that domain. Right. Good answer. I learned recently by some of your colleagues that most of ServiceTitan's data science team is based in Armenia, and it was sort of built here from the ground up. Tell us a little bit about how that came about. Why did you decide to build it here when you guys have teams in different parts of the world?
So one of the things was, there's multiple reasons, but one was essentially, so one of the reasons why the office in Armenia was created, there's a talent pool here, which is, enormous. In Armenia, historically, has always been the tech center. And I learned that yesterday also during the Soviet Union and still to this day, there is a talent here, which is really great, and it's much also it's easier. Like for example, the United States, because the United States, it's a very very challenging environment in a sense. Hiring is very difficult in the US. There's also, I would say, which is interesting, there's also less of a commitment in some ways. It's very easy to change job. It's like you change shirt. And so the notion was, we have in Armenia here, a talent which is really great. Also, we can provide opportunities for the community which is being formed here. So for us, also giving back to the community is very important. And so not only we getting data scientists, ML engineers, and data engineers within ServiceTitan, for us is also to try to give back in the sense of how can we help also universities elevate the data science with the American perspective.
And you guys have active internship programs with the universities?
Yes. So the reason, Armenia also, because I really love the level of educations. I also love the entrepreneurial spirit that you find even in those young data scientists. And for being a data scientist, you need to be, a little bit of an entrepreneur, a little bit of a product manager, a little bit of a startup. You need to be able to pivot. And that goes really well with the Armenian mentality. Seriously, I'm having zero difficulty, explaining my views of the world on data science in Armenia. I really love that. And so between the educations, between the flexibility, between this aspect that I call that data judiciary. I will explain one day. Every day there are problems. Every day stones are being thrown at you. You never attack a problem directly. You turn the stone thrown at you, into an opportunity. It's called judiciary. That's exactly what we have in data. Every day we have problem in data. So you need a spirit. You need spirits which appreciate difficulty. You need people that actually, the more complex the problem, their eyes start sparkling. It's a mentality, it's an attitude. And by the way, when I do interview, it's how I interview. We're going to have a talk. I'm going to give you a problem. I apologize in advance. I'm going to destroy you on everything you say. Because I can. What I want to see is how excited you get. How sparkle. Oh, the problem become interesting. When you have that, I'm hiring yesterday. And I have to tell you that I found that mentality here. And I really like that. I like my team. I can push them. They respond. The more I push, the more they respond. And so there's an aspect of mentality for startup and where we are and the challenge that we have for me, which is really, I'm totally enjoying. And I've had teams in multiple different countries. I'm definitively really enjoying building my team here.
It's fascinating to hear not just an outsider perspective on it, but as a perspective of someone who has had that experience in several different countries, like from in the US and in Europe, leading different teams. It's great to hear the positive, but give us something constructive to work on. What's a part of Armenian both work and engineering culture that you think can be tangibly improved to attract more companies to the country? To
attract more companies? Oh my goodness. Publicity? Because at the end of the talent is there. It's not that it's I don't think people know enough about Armenia. So yes, if you're part of the diaspora, if you're part of, for ServiceTitan, many people know more about Israel. But the similarities between Israel and Armenia are fantastic. But essentially, Israel dominated the first bubble. It was all about knowledge management and the early days of NLPs and everything. And all of the startups were coming from Israel, and then built a system about R&D in Israel, leadership in the US. Hundreds of startups were in the Bay Area in that model. And you knew, if you want to build an R&D team, you go to Israel easily. I didn't know about Armenia about last year. And when I discovered and I came here, so for me, coming here was just an eye-opener. Looking at the community, I know we complain there's not enough people doing publications, we're too small. I heard everything, I heard all of the complaints. What I discovered is an amazing community which is thriving, which is fighting, which is a spirit of entrepreneur, which is trying. The problem that you have is more around education.
Can you expand on that? What exactly do you mean by education?
The education, I think there's amazing effort which are being done now with, I saw two more, I discovered two more this week. I'm just totally blown away. But really, we need to be able to provide an environment where kids have the time to get the foundations. My understanding of in Armenia, very often you go find a job first that can fund your studies later, like your masters or PhDs. Problem, especially with in the world of AI, and I think you want to master first your foundations in mathematics and computer science, in data, in statistics. You really want to have that education proper and have the time to do that, and get a degree and go to a level of a PhD if possible, masters, and a very solid masters. And then after, I would say, go into the industry. I think it's a system that on the long term pay. And so, but that education, I think, is nascent. It's being built, and so the only thing is really encouraging. So one of the aspects for us is how can we help the level of education in Armenia. But for me, it's all about education first.
In Armenia, sometimes we have the issue of sometimes computer science students will get job offers while they're students that are, for the country standards, are quite lucrative.
Yes.
And they will take that offer, and the job becomes their primary area of focus, even if they continue school, for understandable reasons. But I think we need to stress the importance to students to continue the focus on the education so that they have those fundamentals that you mentioned, but also we need to challenge the universities to make the case for why what they're offering is going to be important to them for their future. I think sometimes that's been lacking.
It is a problem, and I know that there's companies that look into Armenia not as not investing in the community, but just a pool of people that and you can throw money at, and today and tomorrow you remove that money, and that money is pretty significant. And I know that you can go. My guys can go to companies and be paid twice what they are being paid today, and they're well paid today, but they can be paid twice. So yes, it is definitively a challenge. But by the way, also for me, the way our employees is what we're also showing them is the what they're getting by staying here instead of going for the fast money out there. But that's an easier problem, is because now they've been hired. But on education, that's the problem. It's really hard to do that. You have to find an incentive where you can demonstrate that waiting a little bit, or allowing that in some ways, even financially. I'm talking about just allowing people to get more of their foundations. The reward on long term is enormous.
Yeah, and maybe also creating it's easier said than done. It's a really complex topic, but creating a structure where they don't feel the need to rush, right? They don't feel the need to get a job as a second-year university student or a third-year university student.
Or maybe program with industries. Industries could sponsor essentially students, and maybe with a contract of hiring them when they're done. So essentially, best of both worlds, they can be supported during their studies, and they have a first job when they leave. There's multiple ways to do these things. So I think there are ways, and it's engaging with the industries and large companies on that type of a system. Right. And that's maybe a way that students will, instead of just jumping to that, money to this XYZ company for 6 months.
I think also if there were high-paying internship opportunities in the summers that, like for example, in North America, computer science students, especially in the summers, can easily make enough to support themselves throughout the academic year and then go back to another internship in the summer. That's another thing I think we're still lacking.
Yes, absolutely. Our internship was the system we had. But it's interesting because as soon as we start paying them, there was also an ROI. Can we hire them after?
Right.
Because
it's a double-edged sword.
But you don't want that. You don't want. No. Yeah. I think there's a way, especially for companies which are investing in Armenia. First, investing without thinking about the ROI.
Yeah.
But then after, it's okay to have an ROI. If you get more engaged, and for example, as I was saying before, is yes, we're paying scholarship, we're paying for masters, we're paying for PhDs, and what we're asking essentially, it's 1 year of service.
Mm-hmm.
The Army does that in the US. A lot of kids
Right.
don't have access to education.
Yeah.
A lot of kids. They go into the Army, and the Army can essentially pay you an education. But then after you do tour of duty.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a contract. It's totally, I would say, totally fair.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ways to tackle this problem. Before I get to my last question, I want to go back to we've been speaking for almost an hour now. I want to go back to something we were speaking about earlier on in the conversation. You mentioned that companies come to this realization of the value of data and how they can utilize that data to increase user retention or increase user usage time across their platforms and stuff. As someone who builds products and someone who has worked with data throughout their whole career, you must have constantly also wrestled with the idea of data ethics and how you think about what is ethical to build, what is ethical to track, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Do you have a general framework for how you think about this?
It's very interesting. I've always been on the other side. I'm fascinated by the human behavior. And as I was saying, the human behavior is everything but objective.
Mm-hmm.
We're, irrational, emotional, immature. We say one thing, we do the other. We're confused. And that's what I love to really kind of model, not fight against, but model. So all of these aspects then, that's some of the aspects. But then you add to those the aspect of prejudice, the aspect of bias. And so for me, it's really, I had to play AI to actually turn that around. So for example, I will give you an example. In the world of jobs, when you look for a job, if you are a typical white collar, you know exactly what you want, what title you have, and your expectation. You can go on LinkedIn and you can search jobs, and there's advanced search engine. The reason why for me Google was fascinating, because it was the opposite. How can we level the field for what we call the blue collars?
Mm-hmm.
A blue collar has no idea what the job is, title. They can tell you what they do every day, but they will never have a title. I don't even have a title. So when you ask them to use a job search engine to find a job, it's a lose-lose. So the mission at Google was, how do you help those people finding a job? So for me, suddenly it was actually use AI to take people where they are in their incapability of searching, incapability of expressing what is a job, not knowing what they would want to do, not knowing what they could do based on their skill set, and being able to have a system that start recommending or giving them search results that are really relevant for them and really good. Mm-hmm. So that's where suddenly I think about AI, this aspect, which is, but on the other hand, yes, you every aspect of being, you have to be careful about biases. As I was telling you earlier, LLMs, one of the best things they do, they encode people's behavior. And humanity has a lot of things which are not necessarily good, and they contain these things extremely well. And so you see a lot of work around ethical AI. So the beauty of it is, where I feel I'm a bit saved, is in the enterprise world, you can control these things much easier because it's there's less aspect of gender bias, age bias, or all of these things. But there's an element where you have to systematically have part of your arsenal testing for these things no matter what. So an arsenal around all the things you care about. Am I biasing because the person is a woman? These things. Am I biasing because the person, is older? And essentially, you want to put that into your system, that you check that, I call that basic 101 unethical behaviors are being controlled.
Mm-hmm. I think most people can get around like a general checklist of things that you shouldn't build biases in. But in terms of more privacy related concerns that come into it, there's a lot of valuable data that can be learned from and even used to build better product features through tracking and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is things that I think we want, right? We want there to be ad networks that are built on understandings of data so that a lot of the products we use are free. But there are questions about how you gather and use that data to build those models so that the ad network works well enough so that the product can be free.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So a couple of things first. The first thing you want to do is always also enable people to opt out of your data. You need the data to do these signals. You
Give the agency to the user.
Yes. So the problem is really we're not magician. I mean, those insights and those personalized recommendations we can do to you is because we know you. How do we know you? Because we have data on you. Mm-hmm. So it's not magic. So what you want is to allow people to opt out of the system. And so actually, even at ServiceTitan, we allow our customers to opt out, to give us the data. Now, the cost is they won't get the recommendations.
Right.
And it's very surprising because, what I found is at ServiceTitan, they really want to be helped. That actually for them, giving the data is more important and being helped than in the more enterprisey world where we say, oh, don't use my data. Right. I was very surprised, actually, they would give you everything. Because if you can help change their lives.
And they see the value, right?
Yes. But now the other thing is what you're talking about actually goes towards also quality of the models. In the sense that if you build what I call, global models that can be applied to everybody, you will make sure that there is not leakage of data from a specific customer. It's bad for your model because that model will be also too much sensitive to that customer and so will not perform well as well. So when you think about developing global solutions, you actually goes into the directions of, more ethic-based in the sense that you're not privileging somebody because you want to privilege everybody. Mm-hmm. So in a global model, customer A, customer Z, you want to perform as well as possible. So your notion is, I really want to be sure that I'm capturing the wisdom of the crowd and not the wisdom of one that I'm leaking to somebody else. Right. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Christian, last question. Where do you hope to see the ServiceTitan AI platform and the AI team in 5 years?
The customer comes to us, give us the keys of the house, and we drive the business for them.
Well said. I hope you'll come back on in the future to tell us about how that goes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.